Picture the scene. Cold, clear water, somewhere in the North Pacific. The shallows along a stony shore. And grazing there, slow, peaceful, almost too large to make sense of, are creatures the size of small whales. 30 feet long, 10 tons. Manatee-shaped, kelp-eating, completely unafraid. They don't run, they don't dive, they have nothing to be afraid of. There are no predators here that can take an animal this size. And on the beach beside them watching are sailors, Russian sailors, from a wrecked European ship. It is the year 1741, and you are looking at the last moments of a species that almost no human eyes will ever see again. Within 27 years, one human lifetime, every single one of these animals will be gone. When you read about an extinction, it usually feels like something distant, a vague slope downward over centuries, forests cleared a little at a time, populations thinning under pressure from humans, as if no specific person was ever in the room. Most extinction stories are like that, slow, anonymous, almost geological. The story of the Steller's sea cow is not that story. We can name the year it was first described. We can name the year the last one died. The gap between those 2 years is 27. We know who killed them. We know what they were used for. We even have a journal, written by hand, by the only trained scientist who ever saw these animals alive, that tells us in detail what we were destroying as we destroyed it. 1741. The Russian Empire is at the height of its ambition under the Romanovs, and it wants to know what lies between Siberia and America. The Great Northern Expedition, commanded by the Danish navigator Vitus Bering, has been ordered to map the route, to find out whether Russia and the New World are connected by land, and to claim what lies between for the Tsar. It is one of the largest, most expensive scientific expeditions in history. 2 ships, the St. Peter and the St. Paul. Aboard the St. Peter, as the official naturalist and physician, is a 32-year-old German doctor named Georg Wilhelm Steller. He is sharp, difficult, brilliant, and badly out of place. He does not yet know that he is sailing into the most important year of his life and the last one of his health. The expedition reaches Alaska. The mission on paper is a success. They turn back toward Russia, and then on the return voyage, everything goes wrong. Months at sea, storms. The men are dying of scurvy, bleeding from the gums, joints failing, slowly starving for vitamins they don't yet understand. In November 1741, the St. Peter is driven onto the rocks of an uninhabited island, frozen, barren, swept by the wind. Captain Bering himself, the man the expedition is named after, dies on this island a few weeks later, never making it home. Roughly half the crew dies with him. The island will eventually be named after him, Bering Island. The survivors are alone, freezing and out of food, on a rock in the middle of the subarctic ocean. And then Steller, exploring the coast looking for driftwood, sees something in the shallows, a herd of enormous animals, drifting slowly in the kelp just offshore. He has never seen anything like them. Nobody has, at least no European, no trained naturalist. They look like manatees, only impossibly big, 30 feet long, stocky, wrinkled dark leathery skin, no teeth, just hard pads inside the mouth, made for grinding kelp. They drift in family groups, mothers with calves, completely unconcerned by the men on the beach. Steller does what Steller does. He pulls out his notebook. While his crewmates are dying of scurvy a few hundred meters away, and the wreck of their only ship lies on the rocks behind him, he starts writing it all down. Steller's notes are the entire scientific record of this species. Everything we will ever know about how Steller's sea cow lived, what it ate, how it moved, how it raised its young, every single fact comes from one man's journal, written by hand on an island where he was slowly starving. Here is what he saw. The animal was a sirenian, the same family as the manatee and the dugong, but it had evolved into something much larger and much colder, adapted. It could weigh up to 11 tons. It had no real teeth, only hard horny plates inside its mouth for crushing kelp. It floated. It could barely submerge. It moved in slow herds through the shallow kelp forests, almost the way cattle move through a field. Steller wrote, like cattle on land, these animals live in herds together in the sea. But the notes are not just anatomy. Steller did something rarer. He watched them. And what he watched, what he wrote down, the sea cows were highly social. They lived in tight family groups. Mothers kept their calves at the front of the herd, the way elephants do, protecting them in the middle of the group. The bonds within a herd were intense. Steller observed pairs that seemed to mate for life, and he wrote a sentence about them that, 3 centuries later, still stops people reading it. He said the sea cows showed, quote, an extraordinary love for one another. When one of them was attacked, the others would not flee. They would try to rescue it. There is one observation in Steller's journal that is harder to read than the others. He describes a female sea cow that had been killed and dragged up onto the beach, and he writes that her mate, the male, came to the shore, came to her body, and then came back the next day. He returned to her dead body for 2 days in a row. Steller did not romanticize it. He was a scientist. He simply wrote what he saw. The animal returned. Whatever was happening inside that creature's brain, whatever the sea cow version of grief might be, it was something. We will never get to study it. We will never see it again. Because the man writing the words was, at that exact moment, watching his crew kill the animal he was describing. The shipwreck crew was starving. They had no choice, and so they hunted the sea cows. The animals were almost impossibly easy to kill. They had no fear of humans. They could barely move out of shallow water. The men would harpoon one from a small boat, drag it into the shallows with ropes, and finish it on the beach with bayonets when the tide went out. A single sea cow gave so much meat and fat that one animal could feed 33 men for a month. The crew survived the winter on them. They rebuilt their wrecked ship using salvaged timber and the bones of the lost. And in August 1742, they sailed back to Russia. They brought with them a story. Steller survived the island, but he never made it home, not really. He spent the next few years exploring Kamchatka, increasingly entangled in political trouble. He was accused falsely of freeing local rebels. He was arrested. He was ordered back to St. Petersburg under guard. And in 1746, while making that long journey across Russia, Georg Wilhelm Steller died on the road. He was 37 years old. His great work on the animals of the sea, the journal that contained everything he had observed about a creature no scientist would ever see alive again, was published 5 years after his death. He never held his own book. But the information had already escaped. The surviving crewmen of the St. Peter had told their story all over Russia. They had told it in particular to one specific audience, the Pacific fur traders. The Russian fur trade was booming. Hunters were pushing east through the Aleutian Islands, chasing sea otters whose pelts were worth fortunes in China. The route those hunters took ran straight past the Commander Islands, past Bering Island, past the sea cows. And here, the fur hunters were told, was an animal slower than the otters, larger than the otters, and so easy to kill that the meat from a single one of them would feed a ship's crew for a month. The Commander Islands stopped being uninhabited. They became a resupply point, and the killing began in earnest. There are still surviving records of specific hunts. We know one Russian fur hunter, Ivan Krasilnikov, killed sea cows in 1754. Another, Ivan Korovin, killed sea cows in 1762. By 1768, 27 years after Steller first wrote them down, Johann Friedrich von Brandt, the director of the Russian Academy of Sciences, was compiling reports from the fur hunters along the route. And the reports all said the same thing. There were no more sea cows, none. An expedition in 1772 found no trace of them at all. Brandt formally declared the species extinct sometime around 1768, 27 years, less than a single human lifetime. From an extraordinary love for one another to none. When Steller stepped onto that beach in 1741 and saw those herds drifting in the kelp, he was not looking at a thriving species. The best modern estimates suggest there may have been only around 1,500 to 2,000 of these animals left in the entire world. They had once ranged across the North Pacific, but they had retreated over millennia of climate change to a single last population around 2 tiny islands. A 2021 study sequenced the genome of the species and confirmed it. The genetic diversity of the last Steller's sea cows was as low as that of the final woolly mammoths on Wrangel Island. They were already a relic, the last surviving pocket of an entire vanished family. We did not discover this animal flourishing. We discovered the last of them, and we ate them. Think about what this means. Of every extinct genus of mammal that humans have wiped out in modern history, almost all of them we know only from bones and fossils. The thylacine, the dodo, the great auk. We have skeletons, a few specimens, the occasional grainy photograph. But the Steller's sea cow is something rarer. We have a biography of it. We know how it raised its young. We know that it mourned its mate. We know what it ate, how it moved, how it lived. We have those things because one stubborn German naturalist, marooned and starving, wrote them down. And that journal exists for the same reason the animal does not. Because the crew kept eating, and the route kept being traveled, and the killing kept going until there was nothing left to write about. There is a stretch of shallow water on the Russian side of the North Pacific, around two small islands in the Commander Chain, where giant peaceful animals once drifted through the kelp in family groups. There is nothing there now. The kelp is still there. The shallow water is still there. The animals are not. They are not extinct because they were dangerous or because something hunted them down through the centuries. They are extinct because they were easy, because they were slow, because they were trusting, because they came back for their dead mates, and because one human lifetime ago, a route passed through their home, and the route had hungry men on it. The only reason we know any of this is because one man, in the middle of his own slow death, decided to write it down. That journal is the species now. There is nothing else left.